Car thefts are on the rise, and so are VIN scams. I've got a first-time guest to discuss it. Let's begin.
This is Debt Free in 30. Here's your host, Doug Hoyes.
Okay, let's get started. Who are you and what do you do?
Thanks for having me, Doug. My name's Michael Rothe. I am the president and CEO of the Canadian Finance and Leasing Association. The CFLA represents what are called asset-backed finance companies. So these are large banks, intermediate credit facilities for equipment and auto manufacturers, and then small independent leasing companies. In Canada, that represents a little over $400 billion in assets financed. And these guys are financing, think planes, trains, automobiles, office equipment, things that make Canadian businesses more productive and workers more efficient.
Anything that John Candy would include in his movie. I got you. So
there you go.
So according to your bio, you've studied at a bunch of different universities, most recently at Harvard University, Kennedy School of Government. But your most important educational accomplishment is that you are a graduate of Wilfrid Laurier University, which is located 2.5 kilometers from where I'm sitting right now in my Kitchener office. So, Michael, welcome very much. You've explained what your association does. And there, you had a research report recently, a few months ago, that said that a car is now stolen every 6 minutes across Canada. So I want you to update me on whether that's still the case, what direction we're going in. So that means that there's going to be like 5 cars stolen before this podcast is over. So obviously that's not good. I would assume that lenders are not very happy about cars being stolen, because if I don't have a car, I can't get to work to earn the money to pay back my loan. And obviously that's not good for the lender or the borrower. So, and I can also tell you from our Joe Debtor study that 67% of insolvent debtors had a vehicle upon filing. And of those debtors, 61% had a financed vehicles. So vehicles are very important to my clients as well. So why don't we start with the big picture? What's going on? Where are we at with car thefts? What direction are we moving? Set the stage for us.
Okay. So we authored our report or released the report in May of last year. At the time, we estimated, based on Insurance Bureau of Canada and Equity data, that the theft epidemic is costing Canadians effectively $1 billion a year in sort of, insurance premiums and costs to the consumer and various other companies. As you mentioned, the report stated that a vehicle was stolen every 6 minutes. I've since been provided an update of that when we attended the Federal Auto Theft Summit in Ottawa back in February. That's come down to a vehicle being stolen every 5 minutes. So we're seeing an increase in auto theft, particularly in Ontario and Quebec, our two most populous provinces, and not uncoincidentally very proximate to the Port of Montreal, which is the number one port where stolen vehicles are being exported out. However, it's not all doom and gloom. We have seen a significant amount of provincial effort in Ontario, not so much in Quebec, but there's still some activity and the beginnings of some action in from the federal government. And at the beginning of 2023, a recent Equity report indicated that we were seeing a slight decline in certain jurisdictions of auto theft. So the creation of some of those provincial auto theft teams, particularly Ontario, really is having an impact, but it takes some time for that to percolate through to the system. And your listeners probably will have, they hear on the news and will have, noticed the increase in the number of large police statements or press conferences where they busted various auto theft rings or re-vinning schemes that are happening in and around the country.
So there's obviously two kinds of auto theft. There's organized and unorganized. So there might be some kid down the street who decides to take my car for a joyride. That's not what the bulk of the problem is. You're talking about something that's very organized, where vehicles are being stolen and then being shipped overseas, which is where the Port of Montreal comes in on all this. So do you have any idea, rough percentages of what we're talking about? How many vehicles of the vehicles that are stolen, how many end up departing the country?
Yeah, for sure. So you're right. It's almost exclusively an organized crime issue, just because of the sophistication required to do something with that vehicle. The movie, sending it to the local chop shop, those days are gone. It's much more sophisticated than that. Police estimate roughly that about 60% of those vehicles that are stolen are being exported. I've heard as high as 80%. It's tough to get exact numbers, but it seems like the number of exported vehicles have come down slightly since the beginning of the stolen vehicle epidemic. The rest of the vehicles are then what are called re-vinned, and we can talk about what a VIN is, a vehicle identification number, and what that means and looks like. But they're basically giving a new identity and resold into the marketplaces as regular cars, not being what they tend to be. And there's a whole panoply of sort of steps that are taken for the criminals to do that. So inherently, that's an organized crime group to be able to organize all this, to access the data, to re-vin it, to be able to transport and container the vehicles, to export it. So when we're looking at some of the other issues we're facing in the country, like guns, gangs, drugs, a lot of that funding, in fact, the majority of that funding, I've heard from the RCMP, somewhere in the order of 90%, comes from stolen vehicles.
Wow. So, okay, so you raised the issue of re-vinning. So we all, like you said, know what a VIN number is, the vehicle identification number. I can look on my dashboard and see this long string of letters and numbers. So What is re-vinning? Why does it happen? What's the deal on that?
So at its simplest, it's basically taking the VIN of a donor car, putting it on the stolen vehicle so that you can sell it as if it doesn't have any issues. It's not stolen. You legitimately have a right to own that vehicle. Because if you knowingly buy a stolen vehicle, then that vehicle gets returned to the owner. In fact, sometimes if you buy a re-vin vehicle, it'll get returned back to the owner. That's the downside to the consumer. You paid the money out, you financed your vehicle, and now you've lost your asset. So what the criminals do is they will look for our donor VINs, and there's a number of ways they can do it. The most simplest is, in Ontario anyways, it's one of the only provinces that allows this inexplicably to me, which is anyone off the street can go into their Service Ontario and say, I would like a copy of ABC company's VIN or RIN, which is a registered identification number. So companies that trade in motor vehicles will have a RIN that identifies them as owning the VINs. You have your own personal one. Companies are given a special one. They'll get this RIN of the company, and you'll particularly want to target an auto exporter because all these vehicles are being exported out. Sometimes that's registered. Oftentimes it's not. In any event, the Ministry of Transportation really isn't tracking that. So they'll have now a list of potential donor vehicles, and they'll have a shopping list. So they'll have, let's say, a Honda Civic, an Escalade, and a Range Rover. And so then they will go to, a young street gang and say, here, I want vehicles of this make, model, and year. Get them for me. So out these kids will go. They'll get the vehicle, return to the criminals, and then they will literally just alter where you can see the VIN. So vehicles have a number of what are called secondary VINs. These are stamped on various parts in and around the body that's kept secret. The manufacturer knows where that is, and the police know where that is, but the general public doesn't. But the ones that you'll see on the door trim and on their dashboard, they'll alter those to the donor VIN. They'll go to either to an unsuspecting dealer or a dealer that they control or cooperating with, and then they'll sell it like, oh, this is my vehicle, right? Like, I'll do this. It's I'm sick of this Range Rover, and I'm going to upgrade to a new one, and then they'll sell that on to the unsuspecting public. There's a number of things that we would recommend the government can do to avoid that. It's harder on the consumer side, but we can talk a little bit about what that might look to sort of at least minimize the chances of becoming a victim. Yeah,
and I do want to talk about that. So are they, on my car, which is like 10 years old, 12 years old, the VIN number is, I can see it when I look through the windshield, it's right on the dashboard. So are they actually physically changing what someone can see when they look through the dashboard?
Yeah, correct. That's exactly what they're doing.
They're actually so they put a new metal plate there or whatever it is. So they go find a list of legit numbers and swap them out. So there's now two different vehicles out there with the same VIN.
That's correct. And VINs are international. Like, so this is it's a 17-digit. It's alphanumeric. It represents sort of a number of things. So it's not just a random set of numbers. It identifies the make, the model, the year, a number of different aspects. So the VIN in one country will be the VIN in any other country. So there should never be more than two of these things. In North America, it would be great if at a minimum, the various department and ministries of transportation would share data, because you could instantly flag stolen vehicles if you got two, right? So A, if it's been exported, B, if there's two on the road, you know that one of those is not a legitimate vehicle. That alone, I think, would probably solve 80 to 90, maybe more percent of the problem. But sharing information between government is easier said than done. For consumers, one of the things that we recommend is just make sure that you're buying from a reputable source. Be wary, for purchasing off what we call sort of curbsiders. These are people who are not registered. They're in the business of buying and selling. They're not legitimate. It's not, my vehicle that I'm selling, a one-off vehicle. It's, go to a registered motor vehicle dealer, because the benefit there is a scrutiny on those dealers to be in the industry. So they go through a test of registration, and that they're, inspected from time to time. So not that that's a perfect system, but it's better than nothing. But what's important is, if you purchase what turns out to be a stolen vehicle from one of these companies, you have the potential then to go to the regulator and say, hey, this dealer ripped me off. I didn't know this was a stolen vehicle. The police have come and seized it to return to the original owner. I'm out $30,000, and you can make a claim to a compensation fund. And so there's actually a better chance to recover that money than if you were buying off what we would call a curbsider. These are unregistered dealers that are selling, pretending to be individuals, and then you have no recourse to get that money back.
Right. I understand why I would want to buy from, like you say, an unregistered guy, because it's going to be cheaper. And but you pay more by going through a dealer. Well, at least you've got some additional protection. And what we're talking about here is used vehicles, right? If I'm buying a brand new vehicle, almost in every single case, I'm buying it from the dealer. So I don't have to worry a whole lot about that. It's really the used vehicles that we're talking about, right?
Correct.
So, okay, so so let's look at this from both a macro and a micro point of view. So when I make you Emperor of Ontario or Canada or whatever, and you get to implement policies to fix this, one of your policies you already said is, well, we need to share information. So, and that's just not an Ontario thing, obviously. That's a North America, worldwide thing, whatever. But having a centralized database, I don't know, put it on the blockchain or something. There's got to be some technological way to do it. So that would be one obvious thing. Can you give me one other piece of advice you would give to the powers that be before we talk about what the individual can do here?
Yeah. So number one, I would limit access to the VIN and RIN data to legitimate businesses and businesses that have been authenticated. So we're not even authenticating third parties who are dealing in sort of accessing this information. Limit it to those authenticated legitimate actors, government and law enforcement. There's no reason for you and I to go in and get rid of a company. No legitimate reason anyways. And then the second is to modernize the process by which vehicle title is transferred. So, I alluded to it in the first instance, which is have a rigorous authentication process so where a third party is doing a dealer vehicle registration, that they've been identified as being able to do that legitimately. Have a process in place where you can authenticate that person. So that's right now very much not centralized. You've got something like 275 Service Ontario operating within the province, 75% of which are privately done. And so there's no unified authentication process. So modernizing how that process works, limiting the access to the information will go a long way. But number one, the sharing of that information between the various provinces and states.
Yeah, and so my advice for your association would be good luck getting the government to do it. I don't know if you follow the news or not, but they came up with this app when you're on an airplane, when you're coming into the country. And it was something that most high school kids could develop in about 3 hours, because it's not that hard. And it took them like $100 gazillion and it still didn't work. So to come up with what you're describing is it's not that hard. It's a database. That's all it is. It's not that hard. But to get all the different players to be involved, that's going to be difficult. But that's your job. You gotta worry about that.
Yeah, sharing the information, that will be tough because you're dealing with all the individual provincial estates, and they all have their own privacy legislation. Right. So there's a lot to get over there, but it's easier than you think. We have private programs like Carfax where they're already getting access to that. So it's not impossible, but that is a high task. The procedures, the modernizing, the limiting access, that's much easier. That would be province by province, and we are seeing some interest. You know, the squeaky wheel gets the grease, as they say. The amount of interest on stolen vehicles, because everyone is being affected. I don't think I've had a conversation yet where somebody during that conversation either hasn't personally been touched by auto theft, a neighbor or a friend has been touched by it. It really is an epidemic. And we are seeing government, putting resources towards the issue. In Ontario, it's at least $160 million that have been dedicated to this, and the creation, importantly, of an auto theft unit and a dedicated prosecution team, which is really important. We're seeing that happening in other provinces. And finally, with the federal summit, we're finally seeing some movement on the federal side. Now, right, for the federal government's a lot of talk. We haven't seen a lot of action. So, but it's only been February. So that we'll watch when the budget gets dropped in April. And with an election coming, I think this will be a potential election issue. So we're hoping to see some movement. But yeah, it's, we'll continue to fight the good fight and try and make it tougher for the criminals to operate in Canada.
Yeah, because what you're really talking about is motherhood. I mean, we're all in favor of that. So obviously you represent lenders who don't want vehicles stolen. Okay, I totally get that. But the borrowers also don't want their vehicles stolen. Like most of the time, borrowers and lenders, we're at odds, right? You guys want to make so much money and we want lower interest. Well, in this case, we're all on the same side here. I want to drive the car. You want me to pay the loan back. Kind of hard to pay the loan back if it gets swiped. And I'm assuming that this has a significant effect on insurance premiums, because if vehicles are getting stolen, then my insurance is covering that. But it may not cover it in full. I mean, I often get people who come in to see me. It's like, yeah, well, my insurance only covered, I don't know, replacement value or something, and I got to get another car. So it's a horrible problem for everybody. I don't think, other than the criminals, there's nobody who's benefiting from this. So, okay, let's get to the only important question here. And that is, what can I as an individual do to protect myself? Obviously, I can lobby the government to come up with all these policies that you're advocating, but what can I do personally to reduce the chance of my vehicle get stolen? And is there anything I can do to figure out if I'm purchasing a stolen vehicle? So let's start with the easy one first. Maybe it's not easy, I don't know. What can I do to lessen the chances that my vehicle gets stolen?
So just before I answer that, let me just respond to your comment about lobbying your MP or your MPP. I wouldn't discount that. When, I do this professionally on behalf of an association, but the number of times I've spoken about auto theft to an MP or an MPP, they'll talk to me about, my constituents have been complaining about this. This is becoming an issue. And as you mentioned in your, so when you were giving the context of the question, no one's going to say this is a bad idea. No one's against this. It's not like we're building a new pipeline or something and there's, two sides of it. There's criminals who might be against it, but other than that, no one is against it. But we need to prioritize it. Why? The government has limited time, limited resources. Why should they be putting their time and resources in this over other things? And that's where it becomes important. Those phone calls, letters, emails to your MP, MPP, they actually really do make a difference because they add up. Now, switching to the actual questions, which was, how can you harden your vehicle from getting stolen? So there's like a number of things. And some of them are super simple, right? I mean, it's amazing that I have to say this, but don't leave your vehicle running and unattended, right? It's still a common mistake that individuals do. Oftentimes, the gig economy, Uber drivers, Uber Eats, these sorts of folks run in, run out. It's convenient. Well, it is until the vehicle is stolen, and they tend to drive newer vehicles. Stolen vehicles tend to be 2019 and newer. So if you have an older vehicle, they tend not to steal it. So that's number one, just like a general awareness. Park your vehicle in a well-lit area. If you got a garage, put it in the garage. One of the other things that we're saying is layer the defenses. So there's no, silver bullet, unfortunately, both in terms of from a policy perspective, but also in terms of hardening your vehicle from theft. So that first step is that awareness. The second thing is most cars these days have a push button ignition. What that means is your car is waiting to receive the signal from your key, and your key is constantly sending out a signal for the car to receive. And then you get in the car, the signal's being received, you press the button, and then the car begins. So what the criminals are doing, there's two ways that they attack the vehicle. One is called a relay attack, where they're maybe parked on the road just in front of your house. They have a device that intercepts the signal, and they create a copy key, which then they use to steal the vehicle. So to avoid that, take your key, check your owner's manual. I didn't even know this. I've been dealing with stolen vehicles for most of my career, but I only found out speaking with one of the manufacturers at the Auto Summit in February. And in fact, you can turn your key off. So different fobs work differently, but effectively, you hold two buttons down for a 5-second period and it turns off the key. So it stops signaling. Another thing you can do, there's a little device that you can slip over the battery in the key. And so if it's not moving, it's not sending a signal. It shuts it down until you start moving it again. And then the last thing you can do is something called a Faraday bag. It sounds very fancy, but basically it's a device that blocks the signal from being sent out. They're little boxes, little bags, little pouches. They're very inexpensive. You could probably get them, I think the Region of Peel was giving them away for free. You can get them at auto retailers or certainly online. So you put your, do one of these, either turn it off, put a Faraday bag, or put a little device over the battery so the signal doesn't get sent out. So that's trying to defeat the relay attack. There is another attack where they go into the port of the vehicle. It's available. All cars now. We heard during the the sort of the logistics crisis during the pandemic and afterwards, where there's 50 chips in every car. They're highly computerized now. Well, to make that work, you need a port to put your device in. It makes it's very convenient. To monitor, your tire pressure for the repair facility to identify where the issue is. Well, it also is open to attack. The manufacturers have defense systems in, and they're constantly iterating. So, the manufacturer I was speaking with was saying, since this was instituted in the mid 2000s, having mandated by the federal government to have immobilizers and anti-theft technology, they're already on version 10. They're constantly updating it. But the criminals, likewise, as soon as they identify it's updated, they break apart that vehicle, find the break, and within 2 to 3 weeks, they've got a workaround. You can buy locks for those if you've got a high demand vehicle. So, for example, Honda CR-V, Ford F-150s, they're high theft vehicles in certain regions. You can, identify that you have a high theft vehicle, then put a lock on it to avoid it being stolen. However, the downside of that, and what we're seeing is the OPP at the Auto Summit mentioned they had seen a 200% increase in Ontario in what I would term violent auto theft. So this is home invasion and carjackings. So where the criminals come in, physically break into your home and steal the key, or worse, wake you up in the middle of the night and threaten you to hand it over, or carjacking, which we all know how that entails. So you can't stop it. Like, if they're going to do it, the issue is clearly in Canada an enforcement issue, and this is why I said earlier the creation of these auto theft units are really critical, so that you have the expertise and the resources available for policing to don't get the low-level criminal who's doing the carjacking or breaking in the house or stealing the car with a relay attack. You want to get the organized crime group behind it that is orchestrating all of this. And as I said earlier, we're seeing more announcements from the police with regards to this. And with those early preliminary numbers in early 2023, where we see a slight decline in some instances, that's good news, right? An increase in recovery rates, a little bit of a decline in some jurisdictions, it's having a bite. So protect yourself, make it harder for your vehicle to be stolen than somebody down the road's vehicle to be stolen goes a long way. Understand that there's no panacea, there's no silver bullet. So just, being mindful and aware, and then, advocate to your MPP or MP that, the government needs to take this seriously, because why do we have a higher per capita theft rate in Canada than in the US when A, we're driving the same vehicles, and B, we actually have immobilizer standards in Canada and they don't have them in the US. So ostensibly, there should be more theft south of the border than north of the border. Canada has become known internationally as a donor country of stolen vehicles.
Well, so one of my ideas would be, why don't we go back to using keys? So my car, which is a 2011, has a key. So obviously nobody can do a relay attack on that. I guess they can do it like in the old days, though, where you just join the two wires. So that's the problem with that theory, right? And so what about putting one of those club things on your steering wheel? Is that just something they're going to saw off? That's not a solution either?
So like the Faraday bag, like parking in your garage, it's not a solution in that it solves your problem, but it's a solution in that it's just one more hurdle for them to jump, right? So the car's in the garage, it's got a club, you've got your keys in a Faraday bag. It just makes that vehicle all the harder to steal. And it's all about getting it done quick and easy, right? So they're going to target, they're going to look for vulnerable vehicles where they can get it, unless that's the, remember I was telling you they have that order sheet. Anecdotally, I was speaking to a colleague who lived in a very, wealthy neighborhood. His neighbors had their Range Rover stolen before, so they actually had these ballast rods put at their driveway. So when they drive in, they go down, they drive in. Then when they park, these things come back up, right? So like a gate. Well, the criminals came with a flatbed and a crane, strapped them up, lifted them in, slapped them on the crane, and drove away, right? Or you get the home invasion. We've heard instances of that. I actually had a member of mine who owns a large financing company, woke up to a sound in his house and was pistol whipped by criminals, and they stole their valuables in the house, but also took a number of keys on the way out the door. There was a number of them. They had targeted him specifically. They knew exactly how many vehicles he came with the right number of vehicles, because he was a car collector, so had more than just one. And so they had, it wasn't just 2 or 3 guys. It was about a half a dozen individuals, so they could drive away with every single vehicle in his garage.
Wow.
So, it's be aware, take those steps. But at the end of the day, it really is an enforcement issue. It's going to be government and law enforcement leadership that will bring these numbers down.
Yeah, and so you're right. It's a two-pronged attack then. So you've given a long list of things I can do to protect myself, but hey, if I've got the vehicle they want and it's high on the list, I mean, I guess one of the solutions then is, well, I guess we could all take the bus. That would solve the problem. Kind of hard to be an Uber driver if you're taking the bus, but I guess maybe not impossible. Or I guess we could all drive 15-year-old vehicles, and then the requirement to steal them would be until they become antiques, and then I guess they want to steal those too. So,
or I drive a stick. A lot of young folks can't. So that's another. We see that a very low theft rate for standard.
Isn't that interesting? Of course, once they've broken the window, now they realize it's a stick shift, and I'm not great driving a stick either.
Well, and I've heard those anecdotes too, where the police recover the vehicle. It comes back in a state that you're like, oh, do I really want this vehicle back? Right. Actually,
yeah. Which is why some people leave the doors unlocked. Then, well, if you're going to steal it, then at least you won't smash it to bits, I guess, in the process. But well, that's all very good information, and I appreciate you joining us, because again, as we've said a couple of times already, this is an issue that everyone is on the same side on. So the only issue then is the cost of enforcement and prioritizing. And that's really the only thing that there is to disagree about. And so obviously you're an advocate for increasing the enforcement. It sounds to me like the Port of Montreal is where we should probably be putting some attention too. I mean, I guess there's a bunch of stuff there must be.
Yeah, I have to say the one sort of government agency that I have yet to really engage with in a meaningful way, just missing from the conversation, is the Canada Border Services Agency. In fact, I have a better relationship with Homeland Security discussing Canadian border security than I have with the CBSA. And in our report, we specifically identified short, medium, and long-term solutions. There are some cheap and cheerful things that the CBSA could do today that wouldn't cost a lot of money. And sharing information when they identify a stolen vehicle seems like an easy fix. So my members who finance these vehicles tell me that they don't get consistent information from CBSA when they've identified a stolen vehicle, meaning CBSA knows that there's a stolen vehicle on a container about to leave the country and then does nothing. Right? There's nothing. They don't inform the financing company, say, hey, by the way, you might be interested to know your vehicle's on this container. Like, that seems like a very simple step we can take today. Another is the bill of lading. In the United States, if you're exporting a vehicle, you need to identify that or have that vehicle available for inspection. It doesn't always get inspected, but it has to be available for inspection 72 hours before it gets exported. In Canada, it's actually the opposite. You don't even have to identify that there's a vehicle on that container, because you can change the contents on the bill of lading 72 hours after it has left the port. So once it's on the high seas and outside of a jurisdiction, and say, oh, our bad, it's not a washing machine or a dryer, which is what they typically use because of the metal and the weight distribution. It can feel like there's vehicles. It's not vehicles, it's these devices. And say, we identified the wrong contents, it's actually vehicles. So that there's no opportunity to have that inspection take place. So you could lie about it, but if you get caught lying, you're in trouble. Now, if you get caught lying, oh, sorry, I had 72 hours. Both of those things could be done today, and in a matter of months, not solve it, but have an impact on at least the stolen vehicle export side. Maybe not the re-vinning side. There's other, we talked about that a little bit more. But yeah, it is a gaping hole in the Canadian border in terms of getting these stolen vehicles out.
Yeah, and
that's why.
Yeah,
got the problem.
It is a problem. And I have no idea how many containers are leaving the port of Montreal every day, but it's not like it's
70 million. So it's a lot.
70 million containers?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's a big number then.
It's a big number. It's one of the busiest ports in North America. But again, you don't need to identify, you don't have to, not every one of them is containing vehicles. So if you change the bill of lading, you identify the vehicles, and then you also identify where those vehicles are going, because predominantly they're going through the port of Dubai to East and onwards to like Eastern Europe or to Africa. So you can identify various ports which are more high risk. So, we talked earlier about blockchain and technology. The systems that CBSA are using are antiquated. They're not training their staff. In fact, the Auditor General just released a report saying not a single CBSA agent has received the full training that they've been identified as requiring to do their job effectively. Not one. So, modernizing their system a little bit, doing the training that they're supposed to do, and showing some leadership. Like, I understand that they want to stop bad things from coming into the country, but as I said at the outset, these stolen vehicles are a significant funding source for those guns and drugs. And so, you can't solve a math equation by only focusing on one side of it. You got to work on both sides to find the solution. And that's where we need to see the leadership from the federal government and the Border Services Agency.
Yeah, I totally agree. If there's a chance that I might get carjacked and physically harmed, and we're not just talking about cars, we're talking about my life and the life of my family. So I agree. This seems like an important issue. So I'm very glad that you've come to talk to us about it today. Is there anywhere you would like to point the listeners? I'll put links in the show notes to some of the information we've got on this, but is there a way, the website of the Canadian Finance and Leasing Association, is there anywhere else you would like to point people for more information?
So we are currently working with a number of other auto-based associations on a website. It's not live yet, and it's going to be, I think it's called heat.com, HEAT. I'll have to double check that for you. So after the show, I'll shoot you a note. And we're trying to aggregate information on this issue, the cost of Canadians, the government interventions, and then importantly, things that you can do to help protect yourself and identify different regions, because the top 10 stolen vehicles in one place are not the top 10 vehicles in another place. It's not, that a certain vehicle is more easily stolen than another vehicle. It's what in that region are the criminals looking for? What's their shopping list look like? And so you can sort of look and help protect yourself and say, okay, I'm in a high theft neighborhood. I got a top stolen vehicle. I really am going to take extra caution. because you can find yourself, if you've got a vehicle stolen, your insurance company may even, I've heard, situations where 1 or 2 vehicles are stolen. It's like, you're not insurable. I'm not going to insure you anymore. You're too much of a risk. Or as you said, there's a cost of premiums. In Ontario, my understanding is it's another $120 on top of your insurance to help to pay for this, right? I mean, the insurance companies have to pass on the cost of the theft, or they're requiring you to, install costly, tracking devices or anti-theft devices, as something I didn't speak about because most people won't do it, but you can get these secondary ignitions installed. They cost, couple $1,000 to install, but for certain high value vehicles, they won't insure you until you do it. So do your research before you buy your vehicle. I'll send you the link so you can include them in the notes.
Fantastic. We will do that. And I appreciate you giving us all this advice, lots of practical stuff and lots to think about. I didn't realize the problem was we're moving a little bit in the right direction, but there's a whole lot more we could do. So I appreciate you sharing that with us. Michael Rothe, thanks very much for being here.
Hey, thanks for the opportunity. I appreciate being able to share the information.
Thank you. So there you go. I will put notes in the show notes. So if you're watching on YouTube or any of our podcasting platforms, and of course we're on all the platforms, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whatever. So please check the notes, and we'll put the links there. And of course, if you are watching on YouTube, link, subscribe. You know the whole routine. New show comes out every Saturday morning. That is our show for today. Thanks for listening and watching. Until next week, I'm Doug Hoyes. That was Debt Free in 30.